The sentence is now just being read. Again, the judge, as we speak, saying careful analysis in this course, had determined that the only lawful sentence that we could sentence without encroaching in the highest office of the land is an unconditional discharge for the crime of falsifying business records, and it is therefore at this time that unconditional discharge is carried through for all of the felony cases in this case.
All 34 counts.
So in this way, I think it's actually not so atypical. First-time criminal offender, Class E felony, anyway, would not see jail time in New York City in a typical case. This is not a typical case. Typically, you would have conditions of discharge. And this judge is, I think, doing a good job of balancing the fact that, yes, he's about to be president. Yes, it's atypical, while still respecting the rule of law.
So this is
this is over. This is over, guys.
Done.
I just wanted to mention, Merchan's already off the bench. We were told as soon as he said, at this time, I impose that sentence to cover all 34 counts. I wish you Godspeed for your second term in office. Thank you. And Donald Trump, president-elect, hangs up the video call. So all told, this, 30-something minutes?
Yeah. Not shocking. This doesn't need to be a whole played out in front of the TV cameras. Judge Merchan is doing his job. I mean, this is almost like the ghost of Jack Smith, not yet, biting Donald Trump on the behind. And you know what? At the end of the day, incarceration or not, you are a felon. No matter what he says, no matter how many times he jumps up and down, he has a right to appeal, and ultimately that will be decided. Donald Trump is a felon with a capital F, period.
And no punishment. But we did hear the prosecution go pretty hard at Donald Trump, even knowing that no punishment was coming. They, in fact, recommended unconditional release when the prosecution took its turn before Judge Merchan gave his sentence. And I wonder, Kristen, your thoughts on how the prosecution approached this moment today, the end of their case, and obviously it may not be the very end of the line. So how much of that was lingering in their mind in terms of what they said today?
I think it's important to think about the criminal justice system not only in the form of punishment, but more importantly in the form of accountability. And quite frankly, the fact that D.A. Bragg set out and has openly stated repeatedly, this is about accountability. This is about accountability. And then in his petition papers in response to Donald Trump trying to push away or dismiss the case, right, to try to stretch that presidential immunity, D.A. Braggs made very clear that his intention was accountability. And that's why he said, listen, if they're going to argue that this needs to be dismissed in the interest of public interest because of the fact that it's going to hinder his ability to really follow through and be a president, then give him unconditional discharge. Still allow him to be accountable, to be saddled with that felony conviction, those felony convictions, I should say, 34 of them, but let him know that this type of misconduct cannot go forward.
So, Adam, talk to us about unconditional discharge, what it means and what does that carry?
So normally a felony sentence, even without prison time, you'd be checking in with the probation department, you'd be subject to drug and alcohol testing, you'd be subject to fines. Each felony conviction would have up to a maximum of $5,000 fine times 34. Here, an unconditional discharge is really done. You live with the stigma of the felony, and you do have certain collateral consequences. Trump had a gun permit. I believe that the NYPD has now rescinded his gun permit. There are certain collateral consequences, but basically he is done. Yet he lives as a felon. He goes into office as a convicted felon.
Adam, can I just get your thoughts on, again, the unprecedented moment that we are living in now? This is going to be the only president in the history of this country to have been sentenced on criminal felony charges.
It is unprecedented. It is historic. It is different. But I come back to, it's the same as every single day in America. Criminals are convicted for their crimes and go and move forward with their lives carrying that stigma of a felony conviction.
So, Jeremy, now clearly, and Blanche said that in the beginning of his comments, that this was all going to be grounds for some kind of legal maneuvering going forward to appeal. I'm just wondering, when he talks about the collateral consequences, what are the collateral consequences for a felon, regardless of the fact that he's going to be entering the White House in 10 days? Just what are some of those, collateral consequences.
Well, as Adam just pointed out, there are certain things for the firearm, for example. I mean, he can still vote. He couldn't run for office on the state level in New York, though I don't expect him to pursue the governorship or anything like that. But any other person would not be able to do so. The big issue is, as I said before, this doesn't go away. There's no expungement in New York. There is sealing, and a felony does seal as a matter of law in 8 years. So it will seal to the public within reason, but this is a public process, especially the most public process we've ever seen, so it's not going away and he's not running away from it. I can't stress enough, I think the big take-home here is not about the lack of punishment, to what you said moments ago. It's about the word of law and accountability. Because no matter what you do or say, you have that right to appeal, and that takes time. But in barring that appeal being successful forever, you will be not just an asterisk, but in big, bold letters, a felon. And who here would ever say it's only an e-felony? Right? I'm not going to jail, big deal. Nobody would say that. None of us would have this job in any capacity if we were convicted felons.
But he could have received up to 4 years behind bars.
One in the third to 4.
He could have received up to $5,000 in a fine per each count. He didn't get any of that. So if you're looking at this as a layman and you're saying, if this person weren't Donald J. Trump, who is going to be president, would that unconditional discharge have been the outcome here? And are the people who might be thinking like, oh, I guess presidents really do play by a different set of rules. What's your answer to them?
Within reason, that's a reasonable response. Because, yes, he's being treated differently. Though one might argue that he would never have been prosecuted in the first place if he wasn't the president or, someone who served as president in that capacity. But we've seen in New York and states across the board have seen legislators on county, state, and federal level get prosecuted for crimes. And we hold our elected officials to a higher standard, not a higher legal standard, but a higher moral standard. So this is fair. It is what it is. He's convicted. That's justice. That's justice.
Kristen, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I think there's two things here, right? There's that accountability, but then there's also the fact that the judges upheld the ability for this case not to be dismissed.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that is really important because not only is it justice, it is justice. It is the criminal justice system playing itself out, not allowing Donald Trump to utilize his position of importance to just allow things to just go away. It is allowing him to be held accountable. It is showing that the rule of law will prevail if allowed to. And I think that is such an important message to tell to the public. Yes, you're absolutely right. It is difficult if I was a convicted felon and I was convicted of the same exact crimes that Donald Trump was, and I got a heightened sentence just because I'm not Donald Trump. Yes, that is hard to digest. But at the end of the day, I think one thing that is very important is that every criminal defendant has the right to have various factors be weighed in their sentencing and it to be applied appropriately.
Let's go back to the courthouse. Our Vaughn Hilliard is there. I'm curious, Vaughn, what's happening there now that this is over? And talk to us more about Judge Merchan's closing message in this case.
Right, the courtroom is beginning to clear out, and the court is officially adjourned after 7 weeks of trial, and then ultimately today's sentencing here. And the Judge Merchan ended by giving him the unconditional discharge sentence and saying, quote, "At this time I impose that sentence to cover all 34 counts." But his parting line to the incoming president was, quote, "I wish you Godspeed for your second term in office. Thank you." And I think to the point that you guys were making here, this is quite a moment coming 10 days before inauguration. The Supreme Court had the opportunity to step in last night in order to issue a stay. Donald Trump has argued that presidential immunity should extend to this transition process, but then the case should have been entirely dismissed. That's what his attorneys argued, in not only to Judge Merchan, but also the appellate division. And of course, they will have the opportunity to appeal this verdict and are going to argue that some of the material evidence that was presented to this jury should have been protected under the Supreme Court's immunity decision over the summer. But I think what is so striking about this current moment, we don't know what is to come for President-elect Trump, and in no way should we suggest that he intends to break the law again. But at the same time, it's not just about President-elect Trump in this term in office, but it's also a clear message that has been sent by this court here in New York to all future presidents that the immunity decision that was handed down by the the Supreme Court does not protect the individual who served as president of the United States in that office from all of their acts. And in this case, on the heels of that Supreme Court decision, Donald Trump had to appear virtually today. And while there is no actual substantive consequence for him, there is a key indicator that if it weren't for him entering office, that potentially he may have faced prison time or something that was unconditional discharge. And while there's a conversation to be had about the difference between the incoming president and any other citizen who may have been found guilty of these charges to any future president of the United States, at least there is now one court case on the record, on the books in the United States that found a former president, an incoming president, guilty of a crime. And I don't think in any small way, coming off of that Supreme Court decision granting presidential immunity for official acts, should it be misunderstood that there are repercussions potentially for some actions by an individual who has either previously held the office of the presidency or was in the office of the presidency, as Donald Trump was when he was making those payment checks to reimburse Michael Cohen, and somebody that is coming into office. I don't think that that should be misstated or underscored enough here coming out of this courtroom today.
34 felony counts, 34 convictions. Was this sentence in line with what someone else in a similar position might get?
No, and it wasn't in line with what any person convicted of a felony in New York State would get. This is a wholly atypical sentencing, and the judge noted that, Chris, because it was like the collision of a typical trial of an ordinary citizen who happens to be, by other ordinary citizens' will, returned to the White House. And therefore, he said the only lawful sentence that he could conceive of was one of unconditional discharge. But he was very clear. This was not about him thinking that the presidency is a mitigating factor. It was just that he felt his hands were tied constitutionally, and to recognize that during the presidency, it was better that this have some finality, that Donald Trump go on and be able to appeal, rather than having this hang over not only his head, but that of the citizenry of the United States.
And Andrew, prosecutors did have their say, as they do in these cases. They described Trump's lack of remorse. They said that his intimidation of witnesses, his accusations of unlawful conduct by the prosecution and the judge. I want to play a little bit of what they said.
He has characterized these proceedings as corrupt, rigged, a witch hunt, or a sham too many times to tabulate. The defendant's rhetoric has only ratcheted up since this court's rulings on his motions to dismiss. He has been unrelenting in his unsubstantiated attacks upon this court and its family, individual prosecutors and their families, the witnesses, the grand jury, the trial jury, and the justice system as a whole. Put simply, this defendant has caused enduring damage to public perception of the criminal justice system.
The public perception of the criminal justice system, that's one part of this, right? I mean, what does this say about the justice system? What does it tell people? I mean, countless hours of investigation, courtroom time, the people who served as jurors in this case. And here we are, he walks away.
So a lot of people have talked prior to Donald Trump about there being two systems of justice, and talked about that in terms of racial terms and in terms of class terms. But what we have seen with Donald Trump is sort of three systems with a very separate system with respect to Donald Trump. There's no question that today...
A system unto himself.
Exactly. And there's no question that New York, in particular, looks really good in terms of the DA's office having pursued this case in spite of enormous obstacles, and the judge as well, and the jurors. The judge today went out of his way to commend the entire court staff, which all of us who were there in the proceedings saw just how efficient it was and how fair the trial was. But I think for the big picture, I think for the sort of the country and also internationally is we do not look like the same country that we thought we were. We have a president who's going to be assuming the White House in 10 days who is a convicted felon. When we think of ourselves as sort of a shining beacon on the hill, it is very hard to have that view when you have somebody who has not only been convicted but continues to denigrate the legal system and the justice system that he will be the head of. So it is real, I think, shock to the system in terms of who we are and how we see ourselves.
And the lawyer sitting next to him is somebody who's going to be a part of DOJ. We'll get to that. But Jonathan, so the president-elect says this is vindication. Politically, does this change anything at all for Donald Trump? In 10 days, he becomes president again.
One, it's not vindication. Two, no, it does not change anything politically. We just went through a presidential campaign where he spent a lot of it in the courtroom in this trial. We spent a lot of it seeing him on trial. People knew that this was one of 4 cases. So, no, this doesn't change the political calculus at all here in Washington. In fact, one could argue that those cases fueled the politics behind him and helped propel him into the White House. But the fact that he has not shown any remorse does not surprise me, shouldn't surprise anyone. He's singing the same old tune. The fact that he's not going to spend any time in jail, I'm sure, rankles a lot of people who would like to see him held accountable in that way. But to those people, I would say that the fact that he has been held accountable, he was found guilty on 34 counts by a jury of his peers in his hometown of New York City. And the fact now that he has been sentenced, he will enter the White House. I think Andrew pointed out, he will be a convicted felon. In stories written about him now through history will make that point. If not on first reference, definitely on second reference. And because of that, history will not judge him kindly.
We know, Christy, that he's free now to appeal this conviction. It was something Trump himself talked about. Let's listen.
They acknowledge what the judge said about no penalty, and there's no penalty. But we're going to appeal anyway, just psychologically, because frankly, it's a disgrace. But they invited the appeal, and the appeal is on the bigger issue. So we'll see how it all works out.
What court would get that appeal, and what would it look like?
Well, he's going to have to work his way through the New York State appeals system first, the first appellate division. Presumably that could work its way all the way up to the top court in New York. That's the New York Court of Appeals. And then if he doesn't get the relief he seeks there, it could find its way back to the Supreme Court, where we've already seen now there were at least 4 members of that Supreme Court, our United States Supreme Court, that didn't even want this sentencing to proceed. So that kind of gives you a sense of maybe how they would view an appeal as well. So, we'll see. He has evidentiary concerns. He's raised a number of different issues, even at the sentencing today, about certain privileges and evidence that wasn't available to him. Again, I don't think those really carry a lot of weight, but he will certainly make those arguments. And it seems like, at least at the highest court, he may have some sympathetic justices.
Well, one thing we can say, Andrew, is the Supreme Court decision was 5-4. All right, Amy Coney Barrett, who was appointed by Donald Trump, voted along with Chief Justice Roberts, siding with the 3 liberal justices. Does this show, I mean, it is a kind of rare show of independence, right? Does it tell us anything about the court going forward and maybe in other Trump-related cases?
Yeah, so first, Amy Coney Barrett, definitely keep your eye on her.
She's surprised more than once.
Exactly. And in the immunity decision that was sort of heavily criticized by me, many other people, she, on important ways, was in dissent. So it was really, in many key ways, a 5-4 decision. So that's why keep your eye on her in the future for independence, and I think sort of honesty and integrity in terms of how she appears to be handling herself in the court. The surprise here was the Chief Justice flipping and going from, because Amy Coney Barrett seemed pretty clear was going to vote along with the 3 liberal justices. So it was the Chief Justice who flipped. Hard to know exactly why. One good sign is that this is really the normal process. In many ways, what he was saying is the normal rule, if it were any of us, is you go to, like, you have a trial, you have sentencing, and then you raise your issues. And that is exactly exactly what he said in his decision, which is this is going to follow the normal processes. It's nice to see the court coming out that way and not treating Donald Trump, at least in this one instance, differently than any other criminal defendant.
Where do you see the appeal going?
It's a really hard question to answer, Chris, because, again, it's a collision course between two different things. In the New York state system, generally, if a judge makes a ruling on evidence that a convicted defendant thinks is faulty, that judge gets a lot of deference on appeal. Usually, the rule is unless that error was more than harmless, the verdict stays in place. And yet, the kind of evidence that he's objecting to that was admitted at trial is evidence that he says constitutionally should not have been admitted because of the presidential immunity decision. So we've got New York law on one hand about procedure and evidence, and on the other hand, this presidential immunity decision that in places is ambiguous, if not downright messy. And the only person who really knows what it means, I will surmise, is John Roberts himself. And I think that at some point, Donald Trump is going to overplay his hand with the Chief Justice in terms of trying to interpret that decision. Last night may have been one of those instances already. We'll see in the future how elastic that decision is.
But first, I want to bring in, and just standing next to me is Chef Jose Andres and actress Jennifer Garner. If you can join me now. I literally just saw them on the road and flagged them down and asked them to come join me. Chef, I want to begin with you. I have to say, this is the last place I ever thought I would see you. Well, I thought I would be sent to somewhere else in the world that would experience something like this, and not to my hometown. What are you doing right now?
Well, it's what World Central Kitchen does. Be next to the people. We activated 1 hour after the fires began because, unfortunately, we have a lot of experience in fires and a lot of team members in LA. And as we saw that the fires keep growing, we keep adding more team members, more food trucks, and we're feeding people in shelters. We are feeding first responders. We are adapting because the situation keeps evolving day by day. And we are in every community, in every shelter, or in the places where the fire trucks gather to make sure that everybody is receiving food and water.
Unstoppable. If you are, that is true. If you are watching this right now and you're in Los Angeles County, you've been evacuated and you'd like a hot meal, where do you go?
Well, the good news is that it's not only what World Central Kitchen does. In the worst moments of humanity, the best of humanity shows up. So it's plenty of restaurants and chefs popping up in the middle of nowhere and doing tacos or hot dogs. So this is fortunately, this is the beauty of moments like this. But obviously, you can go to the worldcentralkitchen.org webpage. We're in a lot of places. We're in a lot of communities. And there you will find some of the places that we are providing meals for the community, on top of the shelters and on top of, obviously, the first responders that we are feeding everywhere we feel they need our help.
Jen, I know you're helping out. Why was it so important for you to link up with Jose for this?
Well, I've lived in and around the Palisades for 25 years. So I think all of us we want to get our hands into working somehow to be helpful. And because of my work with Save the Children, we have a relationship with Chef, and I was able to just say, can I be with you for the day? What can I do to help put me to work? And so.
And this is intensely personal for you. You just mentioned it's your neighbor. You lived here for a long time. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been trying to describe the Alphabet Streets, which are behind us. We're on 5th right now, if anybody knows.
Can I tell you, my best friend's house was down the street. They had a gong in their front yard. There were so many kids. There were so many kids that played in the street, and they would hit the gong at the end of the day and call them home, just like neighborhoods across the country. It is not some faraway place that you can't reach. This is like the street we run down on 5Ks. This is where the little fire truck, that God bless our firefighters, this is where the fire truck goes, on the 4th of July parade. This is a neighborhood. It's a neighborhood.
One of the places that is close to me that I know is close to you is the Methodist Church. Yeah. It's right across the street from Palisades Elementary. When I was a kid, I did the bells. I sang in the choir, poorly. It's gone.
Yeah.
What did it mean to you?
I mean, it's my family's church. and it's where my kids went to Sunday school. We lit the Advent candle together there a couple of weeks ago. We watched the little kids perform. It's a preschool. It's a central place for our community. There's so many incredible AA meetings, Al-Anon meetings. You know, it was a gathering. It's a gathering point for the entire community, and full of really quirky, cool, mostly blue collar people of the community, and just like I love belonging there because wherever I went, I would run into somebody from our.
Do they still do after services on Sunday? Did everyone still gather outside
for coffee?
Cookies and coffee,
cookies and coffee.
donuts?
Yeah.
It was. I remember vividly being a part of that and and feeling like I was a part of a community. I went to the same youth group. How has it been? I'm struggling personally to just kind of make sense of all of this. How has it been for you? And I know you lost a friend.
I did lose a friend, and for our church, it's really tender, so I don't feel like I should talk about her yet. But I did lose a friend who did not get out in time, and you know.
Well, how has it been for you just to see all this?
It's just, my heart bleeds for my friends. I mean, I can think of 100 families, and there are 5,000 homes lost. I could just write out a list of 100 friends who lost their homes. It's just like, I feel almost guilty walking through my house. Just, you know, what can I do? How can I help? What can I offer? What do I have to offer with these hands and these walls and the safety that I have?
Well, you can align yourself with somebody like this.
But let me just say, I mean, it is an incredible thing to watch World Central Kitchen and Chef Jose just come in and just, we've got this handled. Don't worry, we've got you. You know, I mean, Save the Children is mounting response, and we will be in shelters helping parents and kids and keeping them safe and social, emotional, and we'll be here in a big way very, very soon. But until then, the first person here, the first thing you have to do is feed the people who are caring for the communities, and that's what World Central Kitchen does. You're never going wrong if you donate to World Central Kitchen.
But the most important thing here is once the cameras are gone, once everybody forgets about what's happening here, like we've seen in Nashville, in North Carolina, in so many other places.
Yes.
But we need to make sure Paradise, where we need to remember that we cannot leave these communities forgotten. Obviously, everybody has to remember them. We need to find ways so they can start reconstruction. And obviously, when we talk about the federal government, that's where the federal government plays a big role. We need to make sure that the people that lost their jobs, probably for weeks or months, they are not going to have an income, that we take care of those people. This is the type of things we need to make sure that our politicians on one side and the other, they don't start arguing or finger pointing, but working with a smart policies. So in these events, we can make sure that people are taken care of. We, the people.
Let me on that note, let's bring in Jacob Soboroff, who you know well as well, Chef. Jen, you know now. He grew up here as well. But there are people that have been foundational for this community, and these are folks that have worked in the local haunts. You know, Mort's Deli when Mort's was still around.
I just was talking to Jen and Chef just a minute ago, and I just got back from a local restaurant at Cafe Vita, which you know well.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, you know well too.
I've had 100 million meals there.
It is a staple of it.
Yeah.
And as I was just walking over here and hearing you talk about the workers, people know to look to you for a meal. But I know that you also have a message for the workers that work in these places where people would normally get a meal. I mean, the people that make these communities go. What would you say to those people today?
Well, I said before, in the worst moments, the best of humanity shows up. But obviously, what we need to be doing is remembering that the cameras and the lights are going to be used off. And we're going to be forgetting about this. Yeah. And what we need to be doing is, in the long term, that we are here, that we don't forget these communities, that they feel they are supported. Well, with federal aid, but we cannot forget these people, and we need to have good policies and good systems so these people never feel forgotten.
I want to emphasize that because Jen and I were talking about, there's a guy, Albie, who's worked in this community for 34 years, who has been a waiter at Cafe Vita, before that at Mort's, the deli. I've known him since I was 8 years old. He worked behind the counter.
Yeah.
For people like that, what do those people mean to this community?
Yeah, I mean, they're the staple of the community. It's like, I mean, honestly, the Palisades it feels like a little neighborhood. So it's almost like Sesame Street, right? like you know the people who are serving you food. You know the people. You care about each other. There's a reciprocity here, and there's a real love here, and we've got to take care of them. And I can think of people who work at these places that I've been in touch with who, you know, their parents lost their homes, they lost their homes, they lost the place that they work, and they're for so many families, it's just going to be, okay, what next? So we just have to try to slow it down and also just really emotionally support the kids who lost their school, their home, their church, their playground, our little playground down here, just the community. We've got to really do some social emotional support.
I was talking to one mom who was looking at her home. She had her 2 kids with her, and these poor children, I just kept thinking of my own children and how I would tell them about what happened. And they're small, they're 3 and 5. Like, how would I break the news to them that we can't go home, or like break the news that maybe I wasn't able to grab their favorite lovey?
Yeah.
You know, and there's going to be stories like that. You ran with your lives, and how do you help your kid understand that just because the home is gone and our stuff is gone, it's going to be okay. We're going to be able to rebuild. The tumult of that, the disruption of that, and then they don't, as you said, they don't have schools here any longer.
Yeah,
it's having to go from here to build a new life.
The people, and for example, our little elementary school, 35 families lost their homes, 5 teachers' families lost their homes, and the school is instantly curating specifically for each family. What is your child missing the most? They have a family donating Squishables. We have, you know, everybody has some little kid is just like, I just wanted my leggings. I miss it. So we're getting that kid. So the people are strong, and the sense of community is strong. We will look after each other, and that is still here. That's stronger than ever. And just like Chef said, I mean, I've gotten to visit so many disaster relief areas, and you expect to find, I mean, this is tragic, but you always find love and hope. Yeah.
And that's what we need our leaders
That's what we need
and
to
politicians to do. Not bring the worst out of everybody, but use what do we do to make sure that we take care of the people.
This is a man who just was awarded the medal by President Biden. And
That's true.
I know that you were at the White House just days ago, and you have this relationship with this administration. How important is it that the next administration stays engaged in just 9 days' time?
Well, obviously, that will be an important message to President Trump. This is not about red states or blue states or towns that voted for me or towns that didn't vote for me. This is about we, the people, the American people that usually they are always working together in their communities. Nobody knows who votes for whom. It's people working together. That's what any administration needs to remember.
Now, it's important to note that someone else did get convicted in connection with the very crimes that Donald Trump was sentenced for today. That would be Michael Cohen. That's Trump's former longtime lawyer and fixer, a guy who spent more than a decade of his life by Donald Trump's side. Back in 2018, you'll remember, he was prosecuted by the Justice Department under Donald Trump. And he pled guilty and served time for facilitating the very illegal payments that Trump was, quote unquote, sentenced for today. Michael Cohen is Donald Trump's former personal attorney. He's also host of the Mea Culpa podcast and the host of the Michael Cohen Show on YouTube. You can find all of those where you get your podcasts and your YouTube. He joins me now. Well, Michael, I thought of you today because you did, you pled to in federal court the very, facilitating the very things that the former president and incoming president was convicted for before a jury of his peers. It was part of the sentence to which you agreed that you had to serve. Donald Trump was afforded these extraordinary protections, as the judge said, because he was elected the president. How are you feeling about it all?
Look, I'm obviously very torn between what I would have liked to have seen happen. Don't forget, I received a 6-year sentence, 3 years of incarceration, 3 years of supervised release. In my entire legal career, I've never even heard of an unconditional discharge. I was so confused about it, I actually went to ChatGPT, despite the fact that Judge Furman doesn't think anybody should go through ChatGPT, right? And I looked it up, and I was unable to find anybody in history who has ever gotten an unconditional discharge. Now, I think that Judge Merchan was judicious in his decision, and he was also, I think the decision was appropriate. I will turn around and say, however, that where I hate to say this, I agree with Todd Blanche, and I agree with Donald Trump in this. If there's no accountability, and there's no deterrence factor because there is no repercussion for the 34 criminal counts, I don't see the point in having the conviction. They probably could have and should have just dismissed the case all, in and of itself. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, it doesn't make sense. Why would you say that? I don't take solace in the fact that Donald Trump is becoming the very first president or former president of the United States to become a convicted felon. I mean, if it makes people happy so that they can now call him the felon president, okay, that's on them. I still have a lot of respect for the office of the presidency, and I am a firm believer that to commit a crime and have absolutely no punishment, no accountability, no deterrence factor, I just don't see the purpose.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I hear what you're saying fully. It's also, I mean, when you talk about the unconditional discharge, part of this is so crazy is, again, you're a felon officially, right? Like, that label. That label applies to all kinds of people who've done all kinds of stuff, including genuinely horrible things and things that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they made a mistake under the influence of a bad addiction. I mean, I know people that are convicted felons who are amazing people who've rebuilt their lives. And part of what's so crazy about watching all this is, like, we're in a country that puts so many people in prison. So many people end up doing bids young, with real trauma and substance use disorder, and not a lot of, like, mercy and forgiveness from the court, not a lot of, like, well, there's special circumstances. So it's a little tough to swallow in the context of one of the most incarcerated countries on the planet.
Yeah. I mean, we are known for human warehousing, which I like to call it. The thing I take somewhat offense to was really Trump's allocution to some respect, where he's saying that I was allowed to speak like George Washington, but I am not George Washington. Truthfully, I don't understand what he meant by it. It doesn't make any sense at all. But when he also turns around and starts talking about how he's unfairly treated and this is lawfare, the weaponization of the Department of Justice, it was actually his attorney general who was probably the most guilty of weaponization of the Justice Department. I was unconstitutionally remanded back to Otisville, thanks to Alvin K. Hellerstein, removed from it because I refused to waive my First Amendment constitutional right. And I would love to know, I still, after 4+ years, have not been successful in getting any of my documents of the 486,000 documents that exist in order to turn around and to demonstrate how Bill Barr was involved and created this whole concept, as far as I'm concerned, of lawfare. So Donald is wrong when he says that this is the first time ever that this is happening, and of course he's the martyr for the entire issue. He is not. I'm first.
Let me just play briefly a little bit of what he had said to you, which I also was so confused by. I was asking the producers beforehand to get the context, but here's what he had to say briefly.
And this is a man who's got no standing. He's been disbarred on other matters, unrelated, and he was allowed to talk as though he were George Washington, but he's not George Washington. He shouldn't have been allowed.
I will say you are not George Washington. That is a true statement. But it is clear.
I will turn around and say that my hair has definitely gotten gray like George Washington's as a result of this. But no, I am not George Washington.
Here's one thing that does stick out to me, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this. I mean, he's still pretty focused on you. There's all this talk about an enemies list. There's talk about lawfare. There's evidence that William Barr, I think there's good evidence that the Department of Justice was essentially weaponized against you specifically, from Trump down to Barr. Certainly circumstantial evidence, and we don't have the hard evidence, but it appears that is a likely scenario. they're now promising.
Well, I think there's more. Wait, Chris, I want to correct you on something.
Yeah.
I think that it's not that type of evidence, circumstantial evidence. It's factual. They gave to me a document that does not exist in the system. It was a counterfeit document that they created for me. I've actually posted it. I've given it to MSNBC. It's a counterfeit document that required me to waive my First Amendment constitutional right and not publish my first book, Disloyal. When I refused to do it and asked them to tamp down the First Amendment constitutional violating language, they had the marshals there who handcuffed, shackled me, and put me back into solitary confinement, making it a total of 51 days. So, yeah, I believe that accountability should be had, whether it's, you know, they turn around, they make Trump in under conditional discharge, make him go and even just serve soup at a soup kitchen or food to the homeless or to the impoverished. Make there some form of accountability. Now, but that's not what's going to happen.
Well, let me ask you this. So there's already a record here, right, of using the Justice Department and having you in his sights. They're promising this on day one. You know, they're trying to get Kash Patel head of the FBI. Like, what is your expectation, your level of, you know, anxiety or worry about essentially being targeted for unconstitutional and unlawful retribution by the government of the United States?
Well, it's why I actually put in a presidential pardon application, and my hope is that Joe Biden offers and presents me with the same pardon that he did for his own son. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I have been targeted by the bar Department of Justice. That's fact. That's not circumstantial. It is factual. Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein himself acknowledged it was retaliatory, that he had never seen anything like it. I think there are a lot of people that are on this this enemies list. I want to make it clear that from the very, very beginning with the Senate Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence all the way through this Manhattan DA criminal case, I have been subpoenaed to testify. And to be honest with you, based upon this unconditional discharge, to hindsight being 2020, if I knew today if I knew back then what I know today, I never would have appeared for any of these. I don't think it's fair. I don't think that that's the way our system should be designed. I don't think that it's right that somebody should be above the law, despite that the Supreme Court has provided that presidential immunity doctrine, which, again, to me is confounding. But if I knew then what I know now, I never would have appeared.
Michael Cohen, who has spent a lot of time with a lot of lawyers, a lot of cases over the last after the last several years, making some time for us on this eventful and strange day. I really do appreciate it, Michael. Thank you.
Good to see you, Chris.
What is happening in Los Angeles right now is still an active emergency. So keeping people informed with factual information is a matter of public safety. Beyond viral hoaxes like the Hollywood sign catching fire, the most prominent misinformation about the fires in Los Angeles right now is political.
This is a true tragedy, and it's a mistake of the governor, and you could say the administration. They don't have any water. They didn't have water in the fire hydrants. They don't have water.
The problem President-elect Trump was referring to there on Wednesday is a real thing that did happen. On Tuesday night, while LA's 9,000 firefighters all simultaneously fought multiple massive wildfires, some of the biggest LA has ever seen, the fire hydrants did lose water pressure. The system simply could not handle that many fires all at once. But rather than trying to figure out how to help or how to improve the systems, conservatives spread misinformation in order to play the blame game. Early Wednesday morning, Trump was already blaming California's Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, referring to him as Gavin Newscum, and claiming that Newsom had refused to sign a document Trump called the Water Restoration Declaration that would have allegedly given LA enough water to fight the fires. No such document exists. Trump apparently made it up to score political points. And conservative pundits quickly followed suit, blaming everything from fish conservation efforts to Native Americans to diversity programs.
California can't get enough water to fight fires because of a stupid fish. Gavin's literally tearing down Western civilization for fish and Indians. Nothing against the Indians. I love the Indians. But really?
It turns out that in recent years, LA's fire chief has made not filling the fire hydrants top priority, but diversity.
This right here, ladies and gentlemen, this is the leadership of the LA Fire Department. I sure hope they know what they're doing.
Instead of focusing on making sure there's water in the fire hydrants, the Los Angeles Fire Department battalion chief was more focused on racism and making sure there are enough women working at the fire department.
For the record, the reason LA's hydrants went dry on Tuesday night had nothing to do with fish conservation or Native Americans or how many women work at the fire department. All of it is beside the point. And it's not just inappropriate to spread that kind of stuff right now. It's also potentially dangerous because there was a real problem on Tuesday night. Hydrants really did run out of water. And to be able to avoid disasters like this in the future, Los Angeles is going to have to figure out if anything actually did go wrong beyond the system just being overwhelmed. And whether or not something went wrong, the system will clearly have to be improved. And that means getting to the bottom of what actually happened and not pushing partisan lies. Today, not only did California Governor Newsom personally invite President-elect Trump to come to California, inviting Trump to work with him on emergency efforts rather than political smears, but Governor Newsom also called for an independent investigation into the loss of water pressure on Tuesday night, announcing, "We need answers to ensure this does not happen again, and we have every resource available to fight these catastrophic fires." Joining me now to help us understand what we really know about what happened on Tuesday is Marty Adams, who is the former general manager of the LA Department of Water and Power. Mr. Adams, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Your thoughts here are so critical, so crucial in understanding how the situation became what it is. Did conservation efforts pose a problem here? Did they divert necessary water? Would it have made a difference if we did not have those conservation efforts in place?
You know, conservation has been important for the overall water supply in the city, but there's honestly adequate water supply to fight any fire in the city of LA. There's enough water in storage, enough water in our aqueducts that we can fight any kind of fire. The challenge becomes getting the water from where it's stored to where the fire is. And that's what you really saw, particularly in the Palisades. And again, what we just saw the reporter talk about in Altadena, the same kind of thing. You have water systems designed to fight fires based on a structure fire or multiple structure fires, but no water system anywhere in America designed to fight an entire community on fire at once. And it basically just pulls so much water out that the system cannot keep the pressure up as it goes, and then strands our firefighters without adequate water supply and the pressure that they need and like to have to do their jobs.
Do you think a lot of people have been focusing on the Santa Ynez Reservoir, which is a 117 million gallon water storage complex in the heart of the Palisades that was offline, apparently, during the fires because of some necessary upgrades and repairs to the reservoir? I know you were quoted in the New York Times saying that something like an operational reservoir like Santa Ynez would have been helpful initially to more fully feed water to the system in the area, but maybe that it eventually those tanks would have been drained in a fire that was consuming so many homes at once. Can you elaborate on that? Because I know there's been a lot of speculation about this being one of the critical sort of malfunctions in the system. It doesn't sound like you think that.
Yeah, so the water to Palisades all starts what we call the Stone Canyon Reservoir. It's a large reservoir complex behind UCLA in the Bel Air area. And that water flows west out Sunset Boulevard into the Palisades and other communities. And so that's the source of all the water to that area. The Santa Ynez Reservoir is a terminal reservoir. It's a dead-end reservoir at the end of that line, much lower than the main reservoir. And water would be put in Santa Ynez Reservoir. It would help during high summer demands. It would also be there in case there was a break in the pipeline and you want to keep water in that community while the pipe repair is being made. But it's really very much little brother compared to the other reservoir that's feeding all the water. Now, Santa Ynez, my understanding, has been out of service for repair of the cover. There may have been a certain amount of water that could come out and help the system and have been there. But the reality is that the water flowing in the pipe reduced the pressure so much because so many demands on it that you really couldn't pump the pump stations to the higher elevations. And that's where we saw a lot of firefighters struggling for water supply. Even if there was more water available at the bottom with Santa Ynez Reservoir, the pump stations are still a fixed amount. And you might have had a little bit more water get up there, but by and large, as soon as more units started hooking up to the hydrants, you would have been exactly where you were in the first place. And that's with dry hydrants, basically because trying to pull so much water out of the system, so much more than what is ever designed to handle. We have fires in the Palisades almost every year, and they're always fought successfully. They're fought from aircraft and the surrounding hillsides, as well as by ground forces protecting the structures. And it's always been successful. There's no reason to believe that the operation currently that was there wouldn't have been successful. And the whole system's been fed normally with the reservoir out of service. But what we saw was completely different than anybody had ever seen before. We've never seen to go from house to house, block to block through a neighborhood. And that kind of fire has never been anticipated or provided for by anybody's infrastructure.
Well, it sort of sounds like, though, the infrastructure needs to be reconceived, given that we are in the age of climate, change, and these ferocious fires are increasingly more likely. Do you think that that's going to be part of the rebuild effort? Are you optimistic that a system can be built that might be able to tackle fires of these magnitude?
Yeah, Alex, I think you had a really good point there, is that we do need to look differently. When we saw the Paradise Fire, we never seen a community wiped out by fire. We saw what happened in Malibu and Ventura County a month ago. We saw now both Palisades and Altadena. What we thought would never happen has happened several times. And so I do think we need to look differently at what we're going to get thrown at us by Mother Nature. The fact that the dry climate and then the high winds provides a different kind of risk than what we've seen before. I don't know that we'll build out a domestic water system by itself that meets those kind of demands, because there are flip sides. If you build too much storage in the system, you may not need to fight a fire, but you will have water quality problems. And so there's trade-offs and things that have to be taken into account. But there are solutions coming on the market. I know of a company that's looking at fire solutions in wildfire areas, how we might be able to incorporate those in the city where we can maybe move more water from point A to point B, provide additional pumps, something that's temporary that can be put in place where it's needed, because it's not just Palisades, it's Topanga Canyon, it's Porter Ranch in the Valley, East LA, Griffith Park, Bel Air. All these areas are at risk, and from a potential wildfire. So what you look at is a solution that you could use anywhere without having to rebuild the entire system all at once.
It is so invaluable hearing your thoughts on this and getting that information. Marty Adams, former general manager of the LA Department of Water and Power. Thank you, sir, so much for clearing a lot of stuff up for us tonight. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.